Welcome back to Nature Labs and our coverage of the 2025 Canadian federal election. As we wait to find out whether it will be a Liberal majority or minority government moving forward, let's circle back on a couple of the conversations we were having earlier today and conversations we've been having at length in class. For starters, the urban-rural divide. How's that playing out in the election so far? Well, if we look at the map of the early returns, what we can see is a diversity of colors. That means political parties of different stripes are doing well in different parts of the country. That's good news for Canada, as it means that the urban-rural divide might not be quite as stark as we saw play out in some of the provincial elections earlier in this school year. That being said, there is a big caveat to the map you see before you. For starters, the North, and I'm not just talking the territories, but also Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Quebec, are currently slanting towards more progressive parties, largely the Liberal Party. And we often think of the Liberals as being the party of urban centres and the Conservatives the party of rural centres. So why this shift? Why are the Liberals, or the NDP in the case of Nunavut, doing well in these rural constituencies? Well, it's in part because in these areas, the population is heavily Indigenous. And of course, no population ever votes the same way in a monolithic bloc. But certainly in this election, again, early on, what we are seeing is that Indigenous populations, particularly the Inuit, particularly in the northern corners of many of the prairie provinces, are tilting towards the progressive side. Now, whether that's a reflection of Pierre Poilievre, whether that's a reflection of the platform that Mark Carney ran on, that, of course, we can dig into the data afterwards. But what we are seeing is, at least in these rural ridings, the Indigenous vote came out heavily in favor of progressive parties, and again, and most often, that was expressed in support of the Liberals. So what does that mean for the urban-rural divide? Well, it means that in more traditional rural resource-based communities where the population maybe not as heavily favored towards Indigenous populations, it means it's a bit more nuanced. Right now, we're seeing some differences, and the map's changing right before me as we talk, but we are seeing Conservatives locking down ground in Alberta, locking down ground in rural Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and even northern Ontario, rather. And we expect to see the same kind of results playing out in northern BC as well. And in these cases, Pierre Poilievre's message around resource extraction and making sure that those economies can stay strong and vibrant in rural communities obviously is playing very well. Now, that's always been a traditional base of the Conservative Party, but this is only re-emphasizing that divide. So we still see a rural-urban divide, but it's particularly in constituencies where resource extraction is the driving ballot question. Because again, that goes to cost of living, it goes to the trade war. It's all how we perceive these ballot questions within our local community context. So that's something still to watch for. And it's especially important that we watch, of course, the Western Prairie provinces, Saskatchewan and Alberta. Because as we've been talking or discussing the last few weeks, we're seeing a rise of a sentiment to separate from the country. Now, whether that's fully materializes, whether that's about trying to join and become the 51st state of America, that's all open questions to come. But one thing is clear is that the Conservative vote is doing quite well across the country, and it's doing especially well in the Prairie West, even outperforming their results in previous elections, again, so far. That might mean there could be trouble for Prime Minister Mark Carney and his governing Liberal Party to find a way to keep our nation unified, especially in the face of the Trump threats, when so much of that base is skeptical of the Liberals after years of Justin Trudeau's leadership and some of his policies around the environment and the economy. Can Mark Carney heal those divides and find ways to bring the West back into the fold? Because the other interesting factor we've also discussed earlier today is what's happening in Quebec. And we are seeing while the Bloc Québécois vote right now is sitting around 24 seats. That's way down from 33, and some of those seats are still very much a toss-up. The Quebec separatist vote, which has largely propelled the Bloc Québécois in past elections, has moved to the Liberal Party. They're picking up seats right now in some constituencies in Quebec that would be a bit of a surprise for the Liberals, at least in the recent context. That means while prairie separatism is on the rise, Quebec separatism does appear to be on the wane. Again, at least in the face of Trump's threats. It's probably not well advised to consider that Quebec separatism is going extinct. It's probably rather going dormant. geological term for you, while this current crisis continues to play itself out. But that is a window of opportunity, again, for Prime Minister Carney, the Liberals, and the nation as a whole to find ways to bring Quebec further into our national fold and strengthen federalism in a province where it has always been received skeptically. But again, the challenge remains in the West. So that's how the rural, urban, and national unity context is playing out, at least in the early hours of the results coming in from the federal election. In terms of what else to look at in this race, well, there's two things I think are worth looking at. One is the Green Party vote. It's collapsed significantly, even over the mark that they were projected at. We'll see how that finally turns out. Right now, they're not projected to win any seats, even though their MPs are personally popular in their ridings. That again shows you that vote has migrated to the Liberal Party, and it's possible the Green Party's relevance in our electoral context might be in question moving forward. The other party that I'm interested in digging into the numbers, and right now Election Canada's website is down, so I can't get you the results, is the further right-wing People's Party of Canada, led by Maxime Bernier. And the question we have is whether his poll numbers are how they're doing in relation to the Green Party. Because if both the Greens and the PPC produce around the same vote output, but no seats in the House of Commons, there's going to be a real question about what role the Greens can play and what role the PPC can play. And certainly if the Green Party is getting profile, the PPC will need to get the equivalent profile. Or maybe in both cases, they need to get no profile because both parties are beginning to fade to black, again, at least on the national level. But what we are seeing is a strengthening of a two-party system, the Liberals and the Conservatives. And while they've always governed us, smaller regional parties or smaller parties on the federal level as a whole have always played a major role, but that's certainly appearing, at least so far, not to be the case in this federal election. What does that mean for the NDP going forward? What does that mean for the Bloc Quebec Bloc going forward? And frankly, what does that mean for sort of a re-emphasis of the Liberals and the Conservatives moving forward? All of those questions will be answered in the days, weeks, months, and years to come. So certainly a lot of consequences from tonight's federal election. But in terms of what to know right now, the urban-rural divide still pronounced in some areas, particularly when the ballot question revolves around the resource extraction issues and the environment. So again, the environment might not be the top-of-mind issue in this election, but it's very much an undercurrent in terms of the policies and what's driving voters in some blocks of the country and how that might impact national unity. And of course, what we are seeing is a rise of separatism in the Prairie West and a decline of separatism or a desire for separatism in Quebec, which is an important change for the country as well. We'll see how the map continues to play itself out throughout the night, but for right now, that's a bit of context in terms of how tonight's election is playing out and how it impacts some of the conversations we've been having in class.